When a freezing, trembling puppy staggered into the Maple Creek police station that night, nobody imagined it would lead them into the heart of a storm, and into a story that would change an old man's life forever. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Because trust me, this is one of those stories you'll remember long after it ends. The winter wind didn't just blow through Maple Creek, it attacked it. It screamed between the narrow streets like a living beast, rattling shutters, bending the brittle limbs of ancient trees, and turning the snow-covered roads into a ghostly labyrinth. Even the bravest of the town's few stragglers stayed indoors, huddled against the frost that seeped through walls. Stray cats had disappeared into shadows beneath porches. The occasional streetlight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows that looked almost alive in the swirling blizzard. Inside the small police station, the heater groaned against the cold, a feeble attempt at defiance. Officers sat slumped at their desks, mugs of lukewarm coffee clutched in frozen hands, waiting for the long night to pass. No calls, no disturbances, just the oppressive silence, the kind that presses against your chest and whispers that something is coming, something that could change everything. And that night it did. Far outside town, on the edge of the frozen forest, a tiny puppy struggled through the storm. He had been born in an abandoned shed, one of 6 pups in a litter that never saw their mother beyond their first breath. One by one, the others had succumbed to hunger and cold. He was the smallest, the weakest, the one that should have given up long ago. But he didn't. He learned to survive in the most unforgiving ways, curling up in hollow logs, squeezing under broken porches, scavenging scraps that no one else wanted. Snow caked his fur, frostbite clawed at his ears, and hunger gnawed relentlessly at his belly. His ribs jutted through his thin coat, and yet every morning he found the courage to push forward. He didn't know why he kept going. Instinct, maybe. Or hope. A tiny spark inside him refused to let the storm claim him. Every night he pressed on, one trembling step after another, toward the faint glimmer of lights in the distant town. And that morning, after days of wandering, he stumbled across a lonely cabin at the edge of Maple Creek. Inside, Walter Hayes sat hunched in his worn armchair, eyes fixed on a stack of yellowing letters, memories he couldn't escape. He had lived here for decades, alone, surrounded by the relics of a family that had drifted away, children grown and scattered, a wife who had passed too early, friends who had moved on. Walter hated dogs, always had. He saw them as messy, noisy creatures, impossible to control, and a reminder that life was unpredictable. So when the tiny, shivering puppy pawed at his window, eyes wide with fear and pleading, Walter's first reaction was anger. "Go, get!" he barked, slamming the door in the little creature's face. The puppy whimpered, recoiling into the storm, disappearing into the white blur. Walter didn't know it yet, but the same puppy he had rejected would soon risk everything to save his life. Hours later, the door to the police station slammed open with a force that sent papers flying across the room. Every officer jumped to their feet, hearts racing. There he was, the tiny puppy, fur stiff with ice, paws cracked and bleeding, ribs sharp beneath his coat. Snow dripped off him in rivulets, and his teeth chattered with exhaustion. Yet he stood, trembling but defiant, eyes locked on Officer James Harper. The puppy took a hesitant step forward and barked, not the soft, questioning bark of a stray seeking food, but a sharp, urgent cry that demanded attention. Then, in a gesture no one could explain, he rose onto his hind legs, paws pressed together like he was praying. Officer Harper, a man who had seen danger in its most violent forms, felt a shiver run down his spine. He knelt to the puppy's level. "What is it, boy? Show me." The puppy barked again and spun toward the door, then sprinted into the storm. Without hesitation, Harper shouted, "Grab your coats! Let's move!" The officers charged into the blizzard. The wind tore at their jackets, whipping snow into their eyes, cutting at exposed skin. The tiny puppy bounded ahead, a beacon of determination, pausing only to ensure the humans were following. Through drifts taller than their knees, past frozen mailboxes, across empty fields swallowed by snow, they ran. Every step was a battle against the storm's fury. Finally, the puppy veered toward the woods, then into the familiar outline of the old man's cabin. Harper pushed through the last wall of snow, heart pounding, and there he was. Walter Hayes, collapsed, unconscious, fingers curled against the frost, lips blue, thin sweater soaked. The puppy flung himself onto Walter's chest, shivering violently, trying to share what little warmth he had. Then again, he rose onto his hind legs, paws clasped in the air as if pleading with the officers themselves. "Help him, please," his eyes seemed to say. Harper dropped to his knees, checking for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. "He's alive. Get the ambulance now." Sergeant Diaz wrapped Walter in a coat. Another officer radioed for backup. All the while, the puppy refused to leave his post, curled against Walter like a shield against the unforgiving cold. As the ambulance rumbled toward the hospital, Harper held the tiny creature close, examining him in the flickering interior light. "You're tough," he muttered. "Where did you even come from, little guy?" Lucky, because that's the name Harper would give him later. Had grown up without love, without protection, in a world that seemed determined to break him. Every night was a test of endurance, icy wind in his face, the hunger clawing at his belly, predators lurking in shadows. Yet something in him refused to give in. A spark of courage, of instinct, of sheer willpower pushed him forward. Every small victory, a log to sleep under, a scrap of food, a fleeting moment of warmth, hardened him, but didn't make him bitter. Instead, it shaped him into a creature capable of loyalty and bravery beyond his size. Walter's own story wasn't easy. He had once been a man full of dreams, an engineer, a husband, a father, but life had slowly chipped away at him. His wife Margaret died of illness when their children were teenagers. His son moved across the country, barely keeping in touch. His daughter had her own life and family, leaving him alone in the old cabin. Years of solitude had hardened him. He built walls not only around his home, but around his heart. Dogs, to him, symbolized chaos, mess, unpredictability, the exact opposite of the order he craved. He wanted control. He wanted nothing that could hurt him again. That's why, when the tiny puppy appeared at his doorstep, he reacted with fear and anger. He didn't know that fate had a plan far bigger than his pride. When paramedics lifted Walter into the ambulance, the puppy whimpered and tried to jump onto the stretcher. Harper, without thinking, placed Lucky beside him. "He came for us." "He stays," Harper said simply. Inside the ambulance, Lucky pressed his tiny body against Walter, shivering but determined. Hours passed. The snowstorm raged on outside. Finally, Walter's eyes fluttered open. The first thing he saw was the little dog who had once been turned away. At first, he recoiled. "Get this mutt away!" But then he noticed the frostbitten paws, the thin frame, the exhausted eyes. He realized in a heartbeat, this tiny creature had risked everything to save him. The puppy rose weakly onto his hind legs. Paws together, the same haunting gesture from the station. Something inside Walter cracked open. He reached out, trembling, and touched Lucky's head. The puppy collapsed into his arms, finally safe. "You saved my life, didn't you?" "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry," Walter whispered, voice breaking. "If you're still watching, it means your heart went out to that little puppy. Don't let this moment pass. Hit like, share it, and let others feel what you just felt." Days later, as the storm cleared and Maple Creek began to breathe again, Walter returned home with Lucky in his arms. He placed him gently on the couch, stroking his fur. I think you deserve a name," he said softly. Lucky wagged his tail, a faint spark of hope and joy in his eyes. "Lucky," Walter whispered, "because that's what you brought me. Luck, and a second chance." From that night on, Lucky slept at Walter's feet, ate from a real bowl, and followed him everywhere. Neighbors often said they couldn't tell who saved whom, the lonely man who rediscovered love and hope, or the tiny, frost-bitten puppy who had found his forever home. In a world where people pass by suffering, where the smallest voices go unheard, where weakness is dismissed, a tiny puppy proved something extraordinary. You don't need size, strength, or power to be a hero. Sometimes all you need is a heart brave enough to love. Walter Hayes, once bitter and alone, learned that lesson from a creature he had once chased away. Lucky became his guardian, his companion, his miracle. Because sometimes, miracles don't roar. They arrive on 4 trembling paws. If this story touched your heart, don't just let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of courage, hope, and heartwarming heroes. Hit that bell icon too so you never miss a story that could change your day, or even your life. And remember, every like, comment, and share helps these stories reach someone who really needs them. So go ahead, subscribe, and join our family of story lovers today.